The ending of Game of Thrones is widely considered one of the worst endings in television history, and much of that blame is laid at the feet of the show's creators, David Benioff and Dan Weiss. And this is deservedly so, as the final 2 seasons of the show were rushed, poorly written, and relied heavily on spectacle to hide the show's shortcomings. This resulted in some very unsatisfying conclusions to story elements that had been built up for years.
It's all coming back, I hate you! It's all coming back, you understand? I don't like it! I don't like to think about it!
The Double Ds didn't do themselves any favors in the making of episodes released by HBO, where it became even more apparent how little they thought through some of their writing decisions.
Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet.
After Game of Thrones finale aired, David and Dan had become reviled by the fandom, as they tarnished the show's legacy with their half-assed expedited attempt at a conclusion. And in the midst of the backlash, the Double Ds went silent, disappearing into the ether. Until now. Three Body Problem is the first major production that Benioff and Weiss have worked on since Game of Thrones' ending. Knowing that the show was going to be a Double D joint actually made me more interested in checking it out than I would have been otherwise. I couldn't help but be a little curious to see the quality of a Double D ran project in the wake of the greatest success and ultimate failure that was Game of Thrones. I imagine hearing Benioff and Weiss were attached to the project had the opposite effect for most, as there's still a ton of negative sentiment surrounding the duo. They are literally the first thing that comes up when you Google bad writers, so I'd say most people weren't too interested in watching a show where they are the head writers. I'm of the opinion that just because you are guilty of bad writing in the past doesn't mean that everything you ever do afterwards will be valueless. As storytellers, I don't think Benioff and Weiss are as good as the first seasons of Thrones led us to believe, nor do I think they are as bad as seasons 7 and 8 indicate. I think the truth is somewhere in between. I went into Three Body Problem intensely curious and willing to give it a fair shot. Hearing that the show was an adaptation of a book series actually gave me more confidence in it, as what the Double Ds excelled at in Thrones was adapting great source material, rather than the late season riffing they were forced to do after they passed where the books were. For Three Body Problem, the Double Ds became the Triple Ds, as Alexander Wu, most known for his work on True Blood, was named as co-showrunner alongside them. With that said, there is some more crossover between Game of Thrones and Three Body Problem. The score is done by none other than Ramin Djawadi, the genius behind the Game of Thrones score, and who has been more recently working on music for House of the Dragon. There are also some Game of Thrones alumni as part of the cast, notably Liam Cunningham, Jonathan Pryce, and John Bradley in starring roles, and Conleth Hill and Mark Gatiss having cameos in it. I'll be talking in depth about the show, so for the next sections, here is a spoiler warning.
The Santi are real, and they have declared war on us. I plan on fighting back.
Three Body Problem is a first contact story, and what I think the show does an excellent job in is creating the person who would seek out alien life, and their reasons for doing so. The show opens on Yi Wenji, who I will be calling Dr. Yi moving forward, witnessing the brutal execution of her father, Yi Zhitai. Her father is a science professor at a university, and the Cultural Revolution that was raging across China has put him in a dire position. The people have risen up and have started to politicize science and information. It is no longer whether something is true or not. The people are more concerned about what political message these scientific theories project. Were they developed by people with opposing ideals? Well, then they are obviously lies, and are attempts to undermine the revolution. They force Dr. Yi's father to choose, stand true to his scientific beliefs and die, or bend before the will of the mob and deny the truth. However, Yi Zhitai is a die-hard fan of The Big Bang Theory, citing Sheldon as the funniest character in TV history.
Bazinga!
And he refuses to say otherwise. His willingness to stand behind his beliefs results in his death. Dr. Yi, having witnessed her father's unjust death, continues to experience the worst of humanity as the years go on. She is sent to a work camp where she witnesses the destruction of nature, all in the name of progress. She is betrayed by those she thought she could trust, and consistently reminded about the cruelty of humans. As the years pass, any remaining hope she had for humanity is slowly whittled away, leaving her with little more than a doomer mentality. Because she is brilliant, Dr. Yi finds herself working on a communications project, with the ultimate goal being to contact aliens. She devises a way to do this, and even though her proposal is rejected for political reasons, she goes ahead and does it anyway. The response she gets years later from an unknown alien entity is genuinely creepy. Three-Body Problem has some horror elements throughout it, and this moment was one that definitely gave off this feeling. It's a really well done sequence as Dr. Yi reads the reply, telling her not to answer, lest Earth be conquered. Dr. Yi's decision to ignore this warning and respond anyway sets the entire story into motion. Even if you disagree with her decision, you can understand how she came to it after everything she has seen. However, that still doesn't make it right, as she unilaterally decided to invite aliens to invade, something that will have massive repercussions for the entire world. Dr. Yi's thought process when messaging back is that humanity is cruel and is incapable of writing its course on its own. By contacting the aliens, it's almost like waving a magic wand, and poof, some divine god will come down and solve all of the world's problems. Dr. Yi has deluded herself, as well as all of the members who have joined her cult. Something I think Three-Body Problem does really well early on is getting the viewer engaged by introducing a bunch of mysteries. Within the first few episodes, so many questions are being asked. What is happening to all these scientists? What's this countdown Augie is seeing? Why is science no longer making sense? Why did Vera kill herself? What are these silver helmet things? How are the stars winking? How is this strange lady being scrubbed from the security footage? Odds are, at least one of these questions will pique the audience's interest. As the show gets deeper into the season, all of these mysteries are given satisfying answers, giving the audience a much needed payoff. One of the struggles a sci-fi show like Three-Body Problem runs into is trying to convey advanced scientific theory to the viewer in ways that they can understand.
I'm doing a meta-study analyzing the results of particle accelerator experiments around the world.
In English, please?
I like to call these segments Science for Dummies, as there is a few times over the season where a character will be explaining a simplified version of a scientific concept to another character, but it's really being done for the audience. I think the show does a pretty good job of this, using visual elements along with an easily digestible explanation that allows the audience to keep up with what is going on.
Yes, science!
Three-Body Problem excels in providing necessary information in an interesting and visually compelling way. One of the best examples of this are the video game sequences. When the characters enter the game, they have the complete sensation that comes along with reality. The transition sequence showing that they have started playing the game is also really well done. The purpose of the video game sequences, for the most part, is to give the backstory of the San-T, the alien race. The use of the video games allows the characters and the audience to explore a new reality that ends up revealing some incredibly important details about the main antagonists. It allows us to learn about the San-T through understanding what they value. Level 1 shows that they have an appreciation for science. Level 2 shows that their main struggle is trying to live on a planet that is experiencing a three-body problem. Level 3 shows what the San-T truly value. And level 4 tells us that they are on their way and looking for supporters to greet them when they eventually arrive, 400 years in the future. The video game sequences are also some of the more visually spectacular scenes in the show. Although I do just have to mention that during level 3, when we see the army, the CG looks pretty bad. Also, Jack is probably a little too chill about someone breaking into his house and leaving a futuristic video game. He should definitely be a little more skeptical.
So someone broke in and left it here? And then you were like, oh, I should put this on my head.
Another major theme in the show is how faith relates to science. The San-T are hundreds of years more advanced technologically than humans are. This mastery of science allows them to do things that seem completely impossible from the human's viewpoint. When people aren't able to explain things with all of the known science they have at their disposal, they come to a different conclusion, that these things are acts of God. This way of thinking is coupled with Dr. Yi's idea of supreme beings coming to Earth to rescue humanity from itself. As a result of these thoughts, Evans and Dr. Yi effectively lead a cult of alien worshippers. It's interesting in that the faith of this cult is born from the Santi's mastery of science, almost as if science is in itself a god of sorts. The intermingling of faith and science feels like a really unique way of exploring these two things, which are usually diametrically opposed to one another. Because the Santi are all-knowing and capable of just about anything, Evans uses this as a way of manipulating the cult. Whenever people are having doubts or are questioning why their gods would let something bad happen to them, Evans simply replies that if their gods allowed it to happen, then it is for the best.
If our comrades in England were captured or killed, that is all part of the Lord's plan. Yes, of course.
As humans are simply too primitive to fully understand everything their superiors are considering. Evans is one of the characters that interacts most with the Santi. He inadvertently creates the way in which the Santi come to see humans. First off is how he addresses them as Lord.
My lord.
This immediately puts the Santi above them. It's not a partnership where they can cohabitate on Earth as equals. Evans is signaling to them right away that they are superior to humans. Now this way of talking likely comes from Evans' own disillusionment with humanity and his desires for the Santi to save them, but nonetheless, it paves the way for the Santi to think less and less of humanity. Evans also refers to Wade and his team as pests and bugs, a nuisance that can't actually win but is annoying to deal with. Once again, the Santi eventually adopt Evans' way of thinking and apply it to humanity as a whole. Despite seeing the Santi as all-knowing gods, Evans inadvertently reveals their lack of understanding when it comes to storytelling. When he tells them the story of Little Red Riding Hood, he alienates them, teaching them about liars and making them see humanity as nothing more.
We cannot coexist with liars.
Easily the best scene in the show is the reveal at the end of episode 5. As Wade and Jin re-enter the game and the Santi explain to them how in 400 years humanity will surpass them, which leaves the Santi with only one solution: to destroy their science and stop them from advancing. They reveal that they sent 2 Sophons to Earth months ago, and these are the answers to so many questions set up earlier in the season. With the Sophons, they can hinder human advancement, as well as always being able to see what humanity is up to. It creates this really eerie feeling as the Santi are watching the characters' every move. They are never alone. The Santi are always watching. This once again is leaning into a more horror element. This reveal establishes the massive hurdles that humanity has to overcome if they are to come out on top. In this scene, the Santi also take all they have learned from Evans and reveal themselves to the whole of humanity, declaring them to be nothing but bugs.
Letting everybody know in a really visceral way, there's something out there looking at you always, and it does not mean you well.
This whole sequence is easily the best moment of the show, and has me really excited for what future seasons could bring.
The Oxford Five are a group of 5 people who have found community and family with each other.
I haven't read the books that the show is based on, but from what I've read about them online, the main characters don't really have much of a relationship to one another or interact with each other very much.
The main protagonists of the 3 books in the trilogy typically have fairly little interaction with each other. It makes it a challenge for a television series.
So what the Triple Ds decided to do for the show was to create the Oxford Five. They created the Oxford Five to try and create an emotional core for the show, allowing the viewers to latch on to this friend group and make everything that happens to them feel more personal. I actually think this is a great idea, as it makes the audience more invested in the characters and allows us to see how they interact with each other. It also creates heightened emotional stakes for the characters when their decisions impact people they care about. With that said, I think the characters themselves end up being a bit of a mixed bag, and I don't find myself being overly attached to many of them. Jin is one of the characters who I think they do a good job characterizing. She is a brilliant physicist that values the pursuit of knowledge above most else.
Maybe there's more to life than knowing everything.
Unlikely.
There are moments throughout the show where she is so driven to gain the knowledge she craves that she literally can't help herself, even if it comes at the cost of those she loves. After Augie makes her promise to stop going into the game, she lies and continues playing anyway. When it's revealed that the game was a recruitment process to be alien groupies, she is still unwilling to relent, as the possibilities of what she could learn from them could be endless. The biggest moment, though, is when she asks Will to be the passenger for the project that she is working on, knowing that it will result in him being reduced to little more than a brain shot into space. She can't help herself, and I think at least part of her hates herself for this. However, the same thirst for knowledge is what makes her one of the most useful tools in humanity's arsenal. The weakest aspect for me is her relationship with Varma. I feel like they're barely on screen together. Most of their relationship is them talking about how they don't talk to each other. I feel like I was constantly forgetting that they were a couple.
Yeah, we've barely seen one another.
Jack Rooney, played by John Bradley, is the group's lovable asshole. I could see how some would find this character annoying, but I actually really enjoyed him for the brief time we got to see him. The show did a good job hinting that there was more to him than his crude sense of humor, and I actually would have liked to see him stick around a bit longer. I suppose though he was pretty disposable, and that as a snack salesman, he wouldn't have been able to contribute much moving forward in the fight for humanity. Also, with all the nonsense that Sam lived through in Game of Thrones, he was kind of owed a death here. Will is on a completely different show for the first 6 episodes. Where everyone else is dealing with aliens, futuristic video games, and planning humanity's survival, Will is diagnosed with cancer and contemplating asking out his crush. He is in his own little rom-com, and as a result, I felt like a lot of Will's scenes felt disconnected, and I was just kind of waiting to get back to the more interesting stuff. I will give it to them that on a rewatch there's a little bit more there than I initially thought.
It turns out that the cancer's not inherently evil, right? It's actually just looking for a place to live. It gets to stay in its own little corner in my pancreas, and I keep all the rest.
Also, Will's farewell with Saul and Jin are both pretty touching scenes. When he is eventually shot off into space as a brain, he goes off course and is flying aimlessly through the galaxy. I feel like you don't launch a brain in space for it not to come back later on in the story, especially with how much time they dedicated to the project and with Will as a character. I'm not sure how, but Will is coming back in future seasons, and his love of fairy tales will somehow be important in defeating the Santee. Augie is one of the more frustrating characters for me. Her initial plot with the countdown is pretty cool, but I'm not sure why the Santee let her start her work back up later on. I get that they no longer care about the cult, but their mission is to prevent the advancement of human technology. Why not keep her from working? It also feels like she changes her mind a lot. With her working for Wade, then refusing to work for Wade, then deciding to go and work for him again, and then quitting again. It just left me without a very clear idea of who Augie is. I also didn't care for her revenge against the person who funded her project, mostly because it seemed silly and unnecessary.
We had a good conversation when we were deciding how Augie was going to get her revenge on Porlock.
We were trying to talk this through because we had a lot of solutions, but they were all very dumb.
Her sassy comeback that they should arrest her quickly shouldn't mean she gets to leave without any repercussions.
You'll end up in prison.
Well, they better arrest me fast. My flight leaves in 3 hours.
Saul is one of the most interesting characters in my opinion. He starts off as a fuckboy and an underachiever, but at the same time he seems to be the person that manages to see what others can't. His role as a wall facer is really interesting, as he is reluctant to take on the position, with it essentially being forced on him. His refusals are highly entertaining, as no one is allowed to question a wall facer's actions, and so they continue to treat him as such no matter how much he protests, thinking it's just a part of his process.
But I'm not a wall facer anymore.
Of course not, sir.
So why are you still here?
I'm in charge of your day-to-day liaisons.
It will also be interesting to see how the show manages to use Saul moving forward, as a wall facer can't verbalize their thoughts. I think this element provides the show with a ton of potential to communicate what Saul is thinking in different and interesting ways. Moving on from the Oxford Five, we have Detective Clarence. Clarence is the everyman of the show. He is a hard-working individual, a single dad, and in a lot of ways, in way over his head. Much of the early part of the season, we get to see him try to piece everything together, a la some red strings. I really found Clarence's character to bring a lot to the show, as he has a different skill set than much of the cast, and feels very authentic. Thomas Wade is perhaps the most interesting character on the show. He is overseeing the defense of Earth, and is very much the ends justify the means kind of guy. He's willing to go to lengths to achieve victory that others simply aren't, and I think this makes the Santee see him as a threat. He is also a bit of an asshole, but in the most fun way. He is played brilliantly by Liam Cunningham, and I feel like he is one of the characters I am most excited to see moving forward. Even though the Santee aren't arriving for 400 years, the show introduced a way for characters to go into a kind of cryosleep, meaning we can continue to follow these characters throughout future seasons, which I think is to its benefit.
Let's get back. We've got work to do.
Three Body Problem was a very fun watch. It did a good job setting up a ton of mysteries, and its biggest moments gave me some very visceral feelings. I am excited to see more of what's to come, and think the show can only get better from here, now that much of the necessary setup is out of the way. Benioff and Weiss can't undo the wrongs that they did to the ending of Game of Thrones, but that does not mean they are unworthy to continue telling stories. Hopefully they learned a hard lesson with how they ended Game of Thrones, and going forward they don't make similar mistakes with future projects. If you somehow made it to the end of the video, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It really helps out the channel. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.